What is going on, 5-9 gamers? My name is JoeWags here, bringing you another video on Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel here over on 5-9 Gaming. 5-9 Gaming is your source for all things gaming, anime, and entertainment related. Be sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date on all things 5-9. In today's video on Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, we are going to do just a video on deck building. So this is just a flat out deck building guide. I did do a full kind of Master Duel beginner's guide earlier on the channel, but this one's focused just on the deck building part of it, and we're going to go a little bit more in depth on that. So, and this is going to be very much a beginner's approach. I think maybe some veteran players could get some use out of this as well, but we're going to start very basic with some of the more basic things, right? So on my screen here, I've got my Madolche deck brought up as an example. So we're going to kind of use this as our template kind of moving forward. So let's start with the real basic stuff. So in Yu-Gi-Oh! A main deck can be 40 to 60 cards. My recommendation is that you try to keep it as close to 40 as possible. The reason why you want to have a 40 card deck is you want to increase the chances that you'll draw the cards that you need. Now there are very few exceptions to this. There are some decks that run like a full 60 card deck. These are decks that usually revolve around the card called The Grass is Greener. That's a very, very specific deck type, but in general, you're going to want to stick as close to 40 as possible. And then in Yu-Gi-Oh! You have an extra deck. The extra deck is a 15 card deck where all of your extra deck monsters will go. So this would be like fusions, Arkhice monsters, synchros, links, all that. In terms of building the extra deck, you pretty much always want to put 15 cards in it. And basically your theme or your archetype is going to dictate what goes in there. Basically, there's going to be several cards that will fit your archetype, and then there might be some generic cards that can work with your deck. You just have to look and see what's out there. But in general, you want to go 15. There is an exception where there are some decks like Monarchs, for example, actually don't want to have an extra deck at all because they have cards that require you not to have an extra deck to play them. So there are a few exceptions to that, but in general, you're going to want to put 15 cards in here. Even if you don't have like the most optimal things, it never hurts to have options. So just try to find things that you can summon from your extra deck there, okay? Now, in terms of the actual main deck itself, right? Your main deck is going to consist of monsters, spells, and traps. Now, the number of these will vary greatly from deck to deck. I would say a good general, like if you're a newer player and you're just trying to find a good balance, a good starting point is 20 monsters and 20 spells and traps. Back in old school Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm a long-time player. We were very particular. It was usually about like, you know, I liked being at like 16 to 18 monsters and then like 22 to 24 spell and trap, somewhere in that range. But those numbers are kind of thrown out the window in today's game, just because we have things like hand traps. So like cards like Ash Blossom, right? Ash Blossom, or there's like Kaijus. They're technically monsters, but you use them more like a spell and trap. Like their purpose is more like a spell and trap. So you could have builds that have very heavy monster counts in them, but some of those monsters are like hand traps and things that you're using more like a spell. So when I say like 20 monsters, 20 spells and traps as a starting point, it's just that. It's a starting point. But when you're looking at cards, like I said, like maybe Kaijus or hand traps like Ghost Ogre, Effect Veil, or Ash Blossom, I would in my head think of those more as like spell and trap cards in terms of trying to balance the deck, right? Now, there's tons of different decks, right? Tons of different archetypes, tons of different themes. They're all going to have different builds. So that 2020 build I'm talking about is just a reference point, but like there are some decks that might have 30 monsters. There are some decks that might only have 10 monsters in them. But the deck functions in a way where that works, right? So if you're just someone that's a brand new player trying to put something together, you'll notice when you get starter decks, they're going to be pretty balanced that way, where the monster count's going to be probably like 18 to 20, and then the spell and trap card is going to be in that like 18 to 22 or 24, something like that. So just for general numbers, to throw that out, that's kind of a starting point I would use. Now, in Yu-Gi-Oh! Once you start getting into your theme or your deck, and we're going to use my Madolche here as a reference, and I'll kind of explain the thought process with this, but there are different types. Like the cards in your deck all basically serve a purpose, right? They could be a card that starts a combo. They could be a card that maybe extends a combo and gets it going further. There are cards that you like to open up with turn one. There are cards that you like to have later in game. Things like that. So there's kind of been some terminology developed for some of these cards in the community. So we're going to talk about just some general numbers and things to think about. Once again, as a disclaimer, these these numbers aren't like set in stone. Like it all varies. There are different archetypes that do very different things with very different numbers, but just as a general rule, these are some things to think about. So the first thing we're going to talk about in your deck that you want to look at are your starter cards. These are the cards that you want to open with turn one. They are cards that start combos and get your plays going. So because these cards are so important, you do want quite a few of them in the deck. I would say 10 or more of these cards that can get starting going you want to have. You probably don't want to overkill it though. I wouldn't go more than like 15. You don't want like half your deck to be starter cards, right? So like I think 15 is probably, you don't want to go maybe much more than that, because you can get overkill where you have so many starters that you don't have enough extenders and things like that. So cards that start combos. So in Madolche, I'm going to give you some examples. So in my Madolche deck, and if you want to like understand the deck so that what I'm saying makes sense, I do have a Madolche guide on 5.9. Check that out because I explain the combos and how they work. But for example, Madolche Petting Successor, she's like a starter. Basically, if I can get her, she can lead me into all my plays and I can get like a one-turn kill with Petting Successor, right? Another card that would be considered a starter for me is Angeli, because Angeli can search out Petting Successor and I can go into the combo from there. And then I also have Madolche Mageline, who is also a starter because she can get me into Petting Successor, which will get me into my combo. So right there, just with those three monsters, I have 9 starters right there. So those are all cards that I want to open with. If I open with any one of those 9 starters, I can get my whole combo going, once again, provided my opponent doesn't negate or stop my combo, right? So that's just an example of the starters there. So those are basically the cards that get your combos going. Then, as I mentioned before, we have extenders. Once again, extenders are very good. They're cards that maybe don't start your combo, but once your combo is going, they make the combo bigger and like get the combo going all the way through, right? So they're not necessarily cards you want to open with, but once you have your open, you want to have them to follow up. So extenders, once again, you probably want 10 or more of these, or kind of in that range. Maybe like 10 to 12, 10 to 14, something like that. You don't want to go overkill on them, because if you have all extenders and no starters, then you can't really keep your combo going, right? So in my deck, my extenders would be a card like Madolche Hootcake. So if I start with just Hootcake, because what he does is he needs a monster in the graveyard to get his combos going. So if I open with Hootcake and have no monsters in the graveyard, he's kind of like a dead draw, right? That's why he's not considered a starter. But he's an extender, because if I get my starter, I'm going to end up with monsters in the graveyard. Hootcake then becomes a part of the combo, and he extends my plays out, right? Other extenders would be cards like Madolche, so Madolche Chateau, Madolche Ticket, Madolche Salon. These are all cards that give me card advantage, they give me hand advantage, but they have requirements. I can't open with just one of these and get my combos going, so these help extend the combos. The way the Madolche combo works out is my combo will naturally get these cards for me and search them out, and so then I'll naturally get them. So these extenders, like I said, you don't always want to start with them, but they're very important for getting your combos going. They're essential to the deck, so you do want a lot of them in the deck. Okay. Then the next thing we're going to talk about are, I guess, what I would like to call maybe power cards. So they're cards that have very powerful effects. They can turn a game around, but they're very limited and restricted. Like, you typically don't want to open with these cards. They're typically better for, they either need some setup to work, or they're better late game when like stuff is established. So some power cards, and I would say you want to go a little bit lower on these, because they're cards that are going to be dead a lot of the time, but in good situations, they can help turn a fight around, right? Or a match around. So an example of a power card would be like Raigeki or Harpy's Feather Duster. They're extremely powerful because they're board wipe cards, right? Raigeki's a board wipe for monsters. Feather Duster is a board wipe for spells and traps for your opponent. But you draw them turn 1, they're basically dead cards because your opponent doesn't have a field established yet if you're going first, right? Now, if you're going second, they could be decent going second. So a lot of times, even these cards might be side deck cards, which Master Duel doesn't have side deck. So when I say side deck, I'm talking about like real Yu-Gi-Oh, like real life Yu-Gi-Oh. But these are cards that can be a little bit situational, which is why you don't want to overload them in your deck. So I think like 2 or 3 of these would be examples. Now, another example of a power card to me would be like Madolche Pudding Cess. She's kind of like an extender as well, but Pudding Cess is absolutely 100% a dead card all the time if drawn. But she's a part of my combo where if I get my Petting Successor off, she's a very important piece to come out, and she enables me to get my power cards in my extra deck. So the reason why Pudding Cess is so powerful, and I consider her a power card, is basically she allows me to get Chocolat a la mode with her full effect, because Pudding Cess is required to do that. But I don't want to run 3 Pudding Cess in the deck because she's a dead card. If I draw her in hand, you never want to draw Pudding Cess. But she's searchable, so that's why playing searchable cards, power cards, are really good, because then you can search them when you need them. So those are some examples of like power cards, okay? Then what you're going to have, and this next one, the number is going to vary, but you're going to have basically various non-engine cards that are used for defense or like meta counter, basically. So the number is going to vary because some archetypes have a lot of defense built in their archetype. So for example, in my archetype, I have Madolche Promenade, which is a great, basically it negates a card effect, which is really, really good. So this I would consider as a defense card, right? But this is an engine defense card. So this, you just, based on your engine, you play as many think work in there. But we also have non-engine defense cards or anti-meta cards. So these are cards that are used to basically slow down your opponent, stop them from doing their plays, and then allow you to have more freedom to do the plays you need to on your turn. So some example of non-engine cards here would be like Ash Blossom, right? So Ash Blossom would be a non-engine card that, so when I say non-engine, I mean it's not a part of Madolche's in any way whatsoever, but it's just a card to help defend against what my opponent is trying to do, right? And a lot of times these cards can be good to open with. Like I like opening with an Ash Blossom, especially if I'm going second, because then my opponent's going to try to set up their board and Ash Blossom can negate it, right? Infinite Impermanence would be another example of a non-engine defense card, right? Ice Dragon's Prison would be another example of that. And then in mine, I have Goes and Match. Goes and Match honestly is more of a side deck card, but on Master Duel, we don't have a side deck. So you either have to decide to play it or not play it. So I've been trying with Goes and Match. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it just depends. But yeah, basically any of these cards that don't fit your archetype. So like for my Madolche deck, I've got like what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Called by the Grave would be one. So that would be like 8. And then I've got the 3 Ashes. So yeah, I've got like 9, 10, 11 of those, right? I would say overall in the deck, that's probably a decent number. If you could have like, I don't know, anywhere from like 6 to maybe 12 defense cards, whether they're engine or non-engine, I think that could be really good. I also have Gamma Seal. Gamma Seal I would consider as like a non-engine defense card, because basically I can just throw this down on my opponent's monster and I can just take it out there, right? And once again, cards like Gamma Seal and Ash Blossom, I would consider those more like spell and traps, right? So if you look at my monster lineup, I've got what, 10, 20, I've got 21 monsters, but 5 of those I consider spell and trap cards. So it's really like I'm running like what, in a 16 card, yeah, like 16 monsters, and then I'm running like way more spell and traps if you consider Ash Blossom and Gamma Seal to be more like spells and traps, right? So anyways, guys, there you go. That's just a basic overview. And once again, the extra deck, there really isn't much strategy for me to tell you here because every archetype is different. Your deck might use fusions, your deck might use Arkhice, might use synchro. Basically, my advice is make sure you have all 15 slots filled. Use the stuff for your archetype, and then look for generic. So if yours is a synchro archetype, look for generic synchros that can be summoned with your deck, and you just have to read your cards and figure that out. If yours is an Arkhice deck, look for generic things. So like for example in mine, it's basically all Madolche, but then like Leviair is a generic rank 3 that I can make to possibly extend some plays. And then for link monsters like Nightmare Phoenix, Nightmare Cerberus, Nightmare Unicorn, like these nightmares are like generic link monsters that you can run in basically any deck. One thing I do recommend is no matter what type of deck you run, having at least a couple generic link monsters is good, because you always want to have the option to, like, if you just have multiple monsters and their levels don't line up or whatever, it's just nice to have the option that you can link into something, or possibly if like you're controlling your opponent's monster, it won't matter what type they are, you could link it off into something. So having some generic links is never a bad idea. So anyways, guys, let me know if this helps for a general deck building guide. Thanks for watching here over on 5ix9ine, and we'll catch y'all on the next one.